Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. At 19 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a slight frame that made her look even younger than her age. The South Carolina humidity hit her like a wall, and she could already feel sweat beading on her forehead as she joined the line of other new recruits. The other recruits towered over her. Most were men, their broad shoulders and confident stances making Sarah feel like she had wandered into the wrong place. Even the few women in the group seemed more physically imposing than she did. Sarah clutched her single duffel bag tighter, wondering for the 100th time if she had made a terrible mistake. Growing up in a small town in New Mexico, Sarah had always been the quiet one. Her father had left when she was 8, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on a waitress's salary. Sarah had spent her teenage years working part-time jobs to help pay the bills, dreaming of something bigger than the dead-end life that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. The military recruiter who visited her high school had painted a picture of opportunity, education and purpose that spoke to something deep inside her. But now, surrounded by these intimidating strangers, Sarah began to doubt everything. The drill instructors hadn't even appeared yet, and she already felt overwhelmed. She watched as some of the male recruits chatted easily with each other, comparing workout routines and bragging about their athletic achievements. Sarah had never been particularly athletic. She had trained for months before enlisting, running every morning and doing push-ups until her arms ached. But she still worried it wouldn't be enough. When the drill instructors finally emerged from the building, their presence was like a thunderclap. Sergeant Davis, a tall woman with muscles that seemed carved from stone, surveyed the group of recruits with cold, calculating eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, could have cut glass. "Listen up, maggots. You think you want to be Marines? You think you have what it takes to earn the title? Look around you. Half of you won't make it through the first week. The other half will quit before you see your first real challenge." Sarah's stomach dropped. She tried to stand straighter, but next to the recruit beside her, a former college football player who looked like he could bench press a car, she felt invisible. The initial processing was a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and equipment distribution. Sarah struggled to carry her issued gear, the weight of the pack nearly toppling her backwards. She caught one of the drill instructors watching her with obvious skepticism, shaking his head as he made a note on his clipboard. Her first night in the barracks was the longest of her life. The bunks were arranged in precise rows, and Sarah found herself assigned to one near the back corner. The recruit in the bunk next to hers was Jessica Wong, a confident woman from California who had been a personal trainer before enlisting. Even she looked at Sarah with barely concealed doubt. "You sure you're in the right place, kid?" Jessica asked, not unkindly but with genuine concern. "This isn't summer camp. They're going to push us until we break." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She lay awake that night listening to the sounds of 60 other recruits trying to sleep, wondering if she should call her mother in the morning and ask her to come pick her up. The shame of quitting before she had even really started burned in her chest, but the fear of failing publicly seemed even worse. The next morning brought the first physical training session, and Sarah's worst fears were realized. While other recruits cranked out push-ups with relative ease, Sarah struggled to complete even the minimum required number. Her form was sloppy, her arms shaking with effort. Sergeant Davis stopped in front of her, towering over Sarah's prone form. "Martinez, what exactly do you think you're doing down there? Are you trying to do push-ups or are you having a seizure?" The other recruits tried not to laugh, but Sarah could hear the barely suppressed snickers. Her face burned with embarrassment as she attempted another push-up, her arms giving out halfway through the movement. "Get up, Martinez. You're holding up the entire platoon." Sarah scrambled to her feet, her legs unsteady. The running portion of PT was equally humiliating. While the pack of recruits pulled steadily ahead, Sarah found herself falling further and further behind. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, and with each step, the gap between her and the rest of the group widened. By the time she finally stumbled across the finish line, most of the other recruits were already cooling down and hydrating. Sergeant Davis was waiting for her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Martinez, I've seen some sorry excuses for Marines come through here, but you might just take the prize. What made you think you could handle this?" Sarah tried to catch her breath enough to answer, but the words wouldn't come. She could only stand there, gasping and sweating, while the drill instructor continued her assessment. You're weak, you're slow, and you're taking up space that could be used by someone who actually has a chance of becoming a Marine. I suggest you think long and hard about whether you belong here." That evening, Sarah sat alone in the corner of the squad bay, writing a letter to her mother. Her hands shook as she tried to find the words to explain that she was coming home, that she wasn't strong enough for this life she had chosen. The other recruits gave her a wide berth, sensing her defeat. But as she sat there with the unfinished letter in her lap, Sarah thought about her little brother back home. He was only 12, but he looked up to her with such admiration when she told him she was going to be a Marine. She thought about her mother, working double shifts to make ends meet, and how proud she had been when Sarah enlisted. Sarah crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. She wasn't ready to give up yet. She might be the weakest recruit in the platoon, but she wasn't a quitter. At least she hoped she wasn't. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fail, but also new chances to prove that there was more to being a Marine than just physical strength. The doubt and sneers would continue. She knew that much. But somewhere deep inside, a small flame of determination still flickered. She would need to nurture that flame carefully if she had any hope of surviving the weeks ahead. 3 weeks into training, Sarah's situation had only gotten worse. Every morning brought the same routine of humiliation and struggle. While other recruits began to show improvement in their physical performance, Sarah remained stubbornly at the bottom of every measurement. Her push-up count had barely increased. Her run times were still the slowest in the platoon, and her confidence had eroded to almost nothing. The other recruits had stopped trying to encourage her. At first, some had offered helpful tips or words of support, but as Sarah continued to lag behind, their patience wore thin. Nobody wanted to be associated with the platoon's obvious weak link. During meals, Sarah often found herself eating alone. The empty chairs around her table a clear message that she was seen as a liability. The breaking point came during the 4th week, during what should have been a routine obstacle course training session. The course was designed to test not just physical ability, but mental toughness and problem-solving skills. Sarah approached each obstacle with dread, knowing that her struggles would be on full display for everyone to see. The first obstacle was a series of parallel bars that recruits had to traverse using only their upper body strength. Sarah watched as recruit after recruit swung across with relative ease, their bodies moving in smooth, controlled motions. When her turn came, she barely made it past the second bar before her grip failed and she crashed to the ground in an ungainly heap. Sergeant Davis was there immediately, her voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. "Martinez, what part of parallel bars don't you understand? Are you trying to dig a hole to China with your face?" Sarah picked herself up, dirt and sand clinging to her uniform. Her palms were scraped and bleeding, but she knew better than to complain. She could hear the other recruits muttering behind her, their frustration evident. "Can we just move on?" one of them called out. "Some of us actually want to finish this course before dark." The next obstacle was even worse. A rope climb that required recruits to scale a 20-foot vertical rope using a specific technique they had been taught. Sarah had struggled with this particular skill since day one, lacking both the upper body strength and the coordination to execute the movement properly. She made it perhaps 6 feet up the rope before her grip gave out entirely. This time, her fall was even more spectacular, landing hard on her back and knocking the wind out of her lungs. As she lay there gasping, trying to force air back into her chest, she could hear the unmistakable sound of laughter from some of the other recruits. Sergeant Davis's patience had clearly reached its limit. She hauled Sarah to her feet with one powerful arm, bringing them face to face. "Martinez, I've seen enough. You're holding back the entire platoon, and I'm tired of watching you fail at every single task we put in front of you. Report to my office at 1900 hours. We need to have a serious conversation about your future here." The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and dread. Sarah went through the motions of training, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew what that meeting would bring. Sergeant Davis was going to give her an ultimatum, or more likely, simply tell her to pack her bags. During the afternoon classroom session on military history, Sarah sat in the back row, staring out the window at the other platoons training in the distance. Those recruits looked confident and capable, moving through their drills with precision and purpose. Sarah wondered what it would feel like to be that sure of yourself, to know that you belonged somewhere. Jessica Wong, who had been one of the few recruits to show Sarah any kindness, slid into the seat beside her after the instructor dismissed the class. "Hey, you okay? You look like you're about to throw up." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Just thinking about tonight's meeting with Sergeant Davis, I think this is it for me." Jessica was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer. "Look, I know you're struggling, but I've been watching you. You get knocked down, but you always get back up. That counts for something. Does it, though? I can't do a proper push-up. I'm the slowest runner in the platoon, and I just face-planted in front of everyone on the obstacle course. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." "Maybe," Jessica said honestly, "but maybe you just need to find your own way of being strong. Not everyone fits the same mold." That evening, Sarah stood outside Sergeant Davis's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the door, she could hear the drill instructor on the phone with someone, discussing training schedules and recruit evaluations. Sarah's name came up several times, none of it positive. When the door finally opened, Sergeant Davis looked surprised to see Sarah standing there at attention. "Martinez, right on time. Come in and close the door behind you." The office was spartanly furnished with military certificates and commendations covering the walls. Sergeant Davis gestured for Sarah to take a seat in the single chair facing her desk, then settled into her own chair with a heavy sigh. "Martinez, I'm going to be straight with you. In 15 years of training recruits, I've rarely seen someone struggle as much as you have. Your physical performance is substandard. You're holding back your fellow recruits, and frankly, I'm not sure what you're even doing here." Sarah had prepared herself for this moment, but hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. She kept her eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind Sergeant Davis's head, fighting back tears. "However," the drill instructor continued, "there's something I can't quite figure out about you. Most recruits who perform as poorly as you do either quit in the first week or get so discouraged they stop trying altogether. But you keep showing up. You keep attempting every exercise even when you know you're going to fail, even when the other recruits are laughing at you." Sarah finally met Sergeant Davis's eyes, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Why haven't you quit, Martinez? And don't give me some patriotic speech about serving your country. I want the real reason." Sarah thought about the question for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go. This is my chance to be something more than I was. If I quit now, I go back to waiting tables in a town where nothing ever changes. My little brother thinks I'm going to be a Marine. My mom sacrificed to help me get here. I can't face them if I give up without really trying." Sergeant Davis leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with new interest. "So what you're telling me is that you're here because you're desperate, not because you're dedicated?" "Maybe both," Sarah admitted. "I know I'm not the strongest or the fastest, but I'm not ready to quit." "Not yet." The drill instructor was quiet for several minutes, making notes in Sarah's file. Finally, she looked up. "Here's what's going to happen, Martinez. I'm going to give you 2 more weeks. 2 weeks to show me some measurable improvement, not just in your physical performance, but in your impact on this platoon. If you can't do that, you're out. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Now get out of my office and figure out how to stop being deadweight." As Sarah walked back to the squad bay, her mind was spinning. She had been given a reprieve, but she knew it was probably just delaying the inevitable. 2 weeks wasn't enough time to transform herself into the kind of Marine she saw around her every day. But it was something. It was a chance. Sarah's 2-week deadline hung over her like a storm cloud. But instead of paralyzing her with fear, it sparked something unexpected. That night after lights out, she lay in her bunk planning. If she couldn't outrun or outmuscle her fellow recruits, she would have to find another way to prove her worth. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The next morning brought news that would change everything for her platoon. During the daily briefing, Sergeant Davis announced that they would be participating in a major training exercise the following week, a simulated combat scenario that would test everything they had learned so far. "This isn't just about individual performance," Davis explained to the assembled recruits. "You'll be working as fire teams, and your success will depend entirely on how well you function as a unit. Leadership, communication, and tactical thinking will be just as important as physical ability." Sarah felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Paris Island: hope. While she had consistently failed at the physical challenges, she had been quietly excelling in the classroom portions of their training. Military history, tactics, communications protocols, These subjects came naturally to her in a way that running and push-ups never had. That afternoon, during a particularly brutal physical training session, Sarah noticed something that everyone else seemed to have missed. Recruit Thompson, one of the strongest performers in the platoon, was struggling. Not with the exercises themselves, but with something more fundamental. He kept looking around desperately during drill movements, his face showing confusion and frustration. After the session ended, Sarah approached him hesitantly. Thompson was everything she wasn't, tall, muscular, and naturally athletic. He had never spoken to her directly, and she wasn't sure how he would react to her intervention. "Thompson, can I ask you something?" He looked surprised that she was talking to him at all. "I guess. Are you having trouble with the drill movements? I noticed you seemed confused during some of the formations." Thompson's face flushed red. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer. "Look, don't tell anyone, okay? I can do all the physical stuff fine, but I can't keep track of all these different commands and formations. The drill instructors bark out these orders, and half the time I don't know which way to turn or what position to take." Sarah felt a surge of understanding. "Have you tried writing them down? Making notes about which commands go with which movements?" "I'm not much of a writer," Thompson admitted sheepishly. "School was never really my thing. I got by on sports scholarships, but this is different." That evening, Sarah did something unprecedented. She approached Thompson's bunk with a notebook and pen, ignoring the curious stares from other recruits. "Here," she said, handing him a series of diagrams she had sketched. "I drew out all the formations we've learned, with the commands written next to them. Maybe this will help." Thompson studied the drawings, his eyes widening with understanding. "These are really good. You made this for me? We're supposed to be a team, right? If you succeed, we all succeed." Word of Sarah's help spread quietly through the platoon. Over the next few days, other recruits began approaching her with their own struggles. Rodriguez needed help understanding the communication protocols. Kim was confused about the chain of command structure. Patel couldn't memorize the general orders that they were all required to know by heart. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial tutor, staying up late to help struggling recruits with the academic portions of their training. She created study guides, drew diagrams, and patiently explained complex concepts until her fellow Marines understood them. The transformation was subtle, but noticeable. Recruits who had previously ignored or mocked Sarah began nodding to her in the chow hall. Some even saved her a seat at their table. When she fell behind during physical training, instead of leaving her behind, some recruits began running back to pace with her, offering encouragement rather than ridicule. Sergeant Davis noticed the change too, though she said nothing directly to Sarah. During one particularly challenging classroom session on battlefield communications, the drill instructor posed a complex scenario involving multiple units coordinating under fire. You have 3 squads in different positions, each with limited radio contact, and you need to coordinate a flanking maneuver while under enemy fire. Rodriguez, you're the squad leader. How do you handle this? Rodriguez, who would have been completely lost just a week earlier, confidently outlined a tactical approach that incorporated proper communication protocols and chain of command procedures. When he finished, Sergeant Davis raised an eyebrow. "Not bad, Rodriguez. Where did that come from?" Rodriguez glanced at Sarah, then back at the instructor. "We've been studying together as a platoon, Sergeant, helping each other out with the tough stuff." That afternoon, Sarah experienced something she had never expected at Paris Island. During physical training, as she struggled through her push-ups, she heard voices around her counting along with her repetitions. 21, 22, come on Martinez, you got this. Keep your form tight, you're doing great. 25, 26, push through it. For the first time since arriving, Sarah completed the minimum required number of push-ups. It wasn't pretty, and it took her longer than anyone else, but she did it. When she finally collapsed, exhausted but triumphant, several of her fellow recruits patted her on the back. "Nice work, Martinez. Told you that you had it in you." Even more surprising was Sergeant Davis's reaction. Instead of her usual criticism, the drill instructor simply nodded and made a note on her clipboard. No praise, but no criticism either. And for Sarah, that felt like a victory. The change in atmosphere was dramatic. Where once Sarah had felt like an outcast, she now found herself integrated into the social fabric of the platoon. Recruits sought her advice on academic subjects, included her in conversations, and most importantly, began to see her as a valuable member of their team rather than deadweight. Jessica Wong pulled Sarah aside after evening chow, a broad smile on her face. I don't know what you did, but you've completely turned things around. People are actually excited to work with you now. Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I just helped a few people with some studying. It's not a big deal. It's a huge deal, Jessica insisted. You figured out how to contribute in your own way. That's what being part of a team means. Everyone brings different strengths. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the familiar sounds of the squad bay, she realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time since arriving at Paris Island, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't the strongest or the fastest recruit, but she was part of something larger than herself. The real test, however, was still coming. The major training exercise was only days away, and Sarah knew that all the goodwill in the world wouldn't mean anything if she couldn't perform when it mattered most. But for the first time, she wouldn't be facing that challenge alone. The morning of the major training exercise dawned gray and humid, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sarah stood with her fire team, checking and rechecking her equipment, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This was it, the moment that would determine whether her transformation over the past week had been real or just wishful thinking. The exercise was designed to simulate a complex urban warfare scenario. Each fire team would be inserted into a mock city constructed on the base, complete with buildings, vehicles, and hidden enemy positions manned by instructors. The teams would have to navigate through hostile territory, locate and rescue simulated hostages, and extract to a safe zone, all while under constant pressure from opposing forces. Sarah's fire team consisted of 4 members, Thompson as the team leader, Rodriguez as the automatic rifleman, Kim as the grenadier, and Sarah as the team's radio operator and medic. It was a role that played to her strengths. She had excelled in communications training and medical procedures, even if she still struggled with the physical demands of combat. Sergeant Davis addressed the assembled platoons before they loaded into the transport vehicles. Listen up. This exercise will test everything you've learned over the past month. Your performance here will be a major factor in determining who earns the right to continue in this program. Work as teams, follow your training, and remember, in real combat, the Marine next to you might depend on your actions to make it home alive. As they rode toward the training area, Sarah could feel the nervous energy radiating from her teammates. Thompson, despite his physical capabilities, was clearly anxious about his leadership responsibilities. Rodriguez kept checking his weapon obsessively. Kim stared out the window, lost in thought. Okay, listen up, Thompson said, his voice slightly shaky. We all know the plan. We insert at grid coordinates 234567, move through the urban area using building-to-building movement, locate the hostages at the target building, and extract to the pickup zone. Sarah, you'll be our lifeline to command. If we lose communications, we're dead in the water. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The radio equipment felt heavier than usual, but she had practiced with it extensively. She knew every button, every frequency, every emergency protocol. The insertion went smoothly enough. The team moved cautiously through the mock city streets, using the urban warfare tactics they had been taught. Sarah found herself naturally falling into a rhythm, scanning for threats while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for updates from other teams in command. Their first real challenge came when they encountered a simulated roadblock. The instructors playing enemy forces had positioned themselves behind concrete barriers, blocking the team's primary route to the target building. Thompson froze, clearly overwhelmed by the tactical problem in front of them. What do we do? He whispered urgently to Sarah. Sarah keyed her radio, requesting permission to speak to command. After receiving clearance, she quickly outlined their situation and requested support from another team that she knew was operating 2 blocks to their east. Bravo team, this is Alpha team. We have a roadblock at grid 245789. Can you provide a distraction from the eastern approach while we flank from the west? The response came back immediately. Roger, Alpha team. Give us 2 minutes to get into position. While they waited, Sarah studied the tactical situation. She noticed something that the others had missed. A drainage culvert that ran under the road, emerging behind the enemy position. Thompson, she whispered, what if Rodriguez and Kim create a frontal distraction while you and I use that drainage tunnel to get behind them? Thompson looked where she was pointing, his face lighting up with understanding. That's brilliant. Why didn't I see that? Because you were looking at it like a frontal assault problem instead of a flanking problem, Sarah replied. You're thinking like a leader now. Use what you see. The plan worked perfectly. While Rodriguez and Kim engaged the enemy position with simulated fire, Sarah and Thompson crawled through the muddy tunnel and emerged behind the instructors. The drill instructors, impressed by the tactical creativity, declared the roadblock cleared. As they continued through the exercise, Sarah found herself becoming more confident and assertive. When Kim was wounded by simulated shrapnel, Sarah immediately began treating him according to battlefield medical protocols, calling for evacuation support while ensuring the team could continue their mission. When they reached the target building where the hostages were supposedly being held, they discovered that the scenario had been made more complex. Instead of simply locating and extracting the hostages, they found themselves in the middle of a three-way firefight between multiple instructor teams. Thompson looked around desperately, clearly overwhelmed by the chaos. Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled him into cover behind a concrete barrier. We need to coordinate with the other teams, she said, already working her radio. There are at least 3 different instructor positions, but I can hear 2 other fire teams on the radio net. If we can get everyone working together instead of just reacting, we can control this situation. Sarah quickly established contact with the other team leaders, creating an impromptu command net that allowed all the friendly forces to coordinate their movements. She relayed position reports, called in support requests, and even directed one team to a better tactical position when she noticed they were about to walk into an ambush. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a confused, chaotic firefight quickly became an organized tactical movement. The 3 fire teams, working in coordination through Sarah's radio network, systematically cleared each enemy position and successfully extracted the simulated hostages. As they moved toward the pickup zone for extraction, Thompson turned to Sarah with genuine admiration in his eyes. I don't know how you did that back there, but you basically ran the whole operation. I've never seen anyone work a radio like that under pressure. You did great as team leader, Sarah replied. You made the tactical decisions. I just helped with the communications. No, it was more than that. You saw the big picture when the rest of us were just focused on our little piece of it. When they finally reached the extraction point, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced since arriving at Paris Island. She had contributed meaningfully to her team's success, using skills that had nothing to do with how many push-ups she could do or how fast she could run. The debriefing session that evening was eye-opening. The instructors reviewed each team's performance, highlighting both successes and failures. When they reached Sarah's team, the lead instructor's comments were particularly interesting. Alpha Team showed exceptional adaptability and tactical communication during the urban phase of the exercise. Your radio operator, Recruit Martinez, demonstrated outstanding ability to coordinate multiple units under pressure. This kind of battlefield awareness and communication skill is exactly what we need in our Marines. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with pride and embarrassment. Around the room, she could see her fellow recruits looking at her with new respect. Even some who had never spoken to her before were nodding approvingly. But the real validation came from Sergeant Davis, who approached Sarah after the formal debriefing ended. Martinez, I watched the radio logs from today's exercise. You handled more communications traffic than some Marines with years of experience. More importantly, you kept your head when things got complicated and helped coordinate a successful mission. Sarah stood at attention, unsure how to respond. Thank you, Sergeant. I'm not finished. You've shown me something over the past 2 weeks that I didn't expect to see. You figured out how to be valuable to your team in ways that don't show up on a physical fitness test. That's the kind of thinking we need in our Corps. As Sarah walked back to the squad bay that evening, she realized that something fundamental had changed in how she saw herself and how others saw her. She still wasn't the strongest or fastest Marine in the platoon, but she had found her place and proven her worth in a way that mattered. 3 months into training, just when Sarah had begun to feel secure in her place within the platoon, everything changed in a single, terrifying moment. The incident happened during what should have been a routine live-fire exercise at the rifle range. Sarah and her fellow recruits were practicing marksmanship skills, something she had actually become quite proficient at. When the unthinkable occurred, Recruit Williams, a cocky young man from Texas who had never quite accepted Sarah as an equal despite her recent successes, was having trouble with his rifle. Instead of following proper safety protocols and calling for an instructor, he decided to try fixing the jam himself while the weapon was still loaded. Sarah, positioned 2 lanes down from him, was the first to notice what was happening. "William, stop," she shouted. But her warning came too late. The rifle discharged accidentally, the bullet ricocheting off a metal target frame and sending fragments flying across the range. In the chaos that followed, Sarah heard screaming and saw Jessica Wong collapse, blood spreading across her uniform where shrapnel had struck her in the chest and leg. Without thinking, Sarah dropped her own weapon and sprinted across the firing line, ignoring the range safety officer's shouts for everyone to stay in position. Her medical training kicked in automatically as she reached Jessica's side, her hands moving with practiced precision to assess the wounds. "I need a corpsman over here now," Sarah yelled, applying direct pressure to Jessica's chest wound while simultaneously checking for other injuries. "And someone call for a medevac." Jessica was conscious but going into shock, her breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah worked frantically to control the bleeding, drawing on every bit of medical training she had absorbed over the past months. She established an airway, checked for internal bleeding, and began treating Jessica for traumatic shock. "Stay with me, Jessica," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "You're going to be okay. Help is on the way." The base medical team arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours to Sarah. She continued providing care until the corpsman took over, giving him a clear, concise report on Jessica's injuries and the treatment she had provided. "Good work, Marine," the corpsman said as they loaded Jessica onto a stretcher. "Your quick thinking probably saved her life." The aftermath of the incident was swift and severe. Williams was immediately removed from training and faced serious disciplinary action for his safety violation. The entire platoon was placed under review while the incident was investigated, and their graduation timeline was put on hold. But the real crisis for Sarah came in the days that followed. Word of the accident spread throughout the base, and with it came whispers and speculation about what had really happened. Some versions of the story painted Sarah as a hero who had rushed to save a fellow Marine. Others suggested that she had somehow been responsible for the accident, that her presence as the weak link in the platoon had somehow contributed to the breakdown in discipline and safety. The worst rumors came from Williams himself, who was facing potential court-martial and seemed desperate to shift blame away from his own actions. In conversations with other recruits, he began suggesting that Sarah had distracted him, that her constant struggles and need for help had created an atmosphere of lowered standards that led to the accident. "I'm telling you, if Martinez hadn't been taking up everyone's attention with her problems, I would have been more focused on my weapon," Sarah overheard him telling a group of recruits from another platoon. "She's been a distraction since day one." The accusations hurt more than any physical training Sarah had endured. Just when she had found her place and earned respect from her fellow Marines, she found herself once again isolated and blamed for problems beyond her control. Some recruits began avoiding her, afraid that association with her might hurt their own chances of graduation. Even worse, the stress of the situation began to affect her performance. During physical training sessions, Sarah found herself making mistakes she hadn't made in weeks. Her confidence, so carefully built up over months of hard work, began to crumble. She started second-guessing herself, wondering if Williams might be right, if her presence really was somehow detrimental to the platoon. The investigation into the accident dragged on for 2 weeks, during which time Sarah felt like she was living under a microscope. Every action was scrutinized, every mistake magnified. Some of the drill instructors seemed to be giving her extra attention, though whether it was positive or negative was impossible to tell. The breaking point came during a particularly intense training session 2 weeks after the accident. Sarah was attempting to navigate an obstacle course when she hesitated at a rope climb that she had successfully completed just days before. The hesitation turned into failure, and she found herself once again struggling with a task that should have been within her capabilities. Sergeant Davis was there immediately, her voice cutting through the morning air with familiar sharpness. "Martinez!" What happened to the Marine who was coordinating radio traffic like a seasoned veteran just 2 weeks ago? Where did that confidence go? Sarah couldn't answer. She hung from the rope, unable to pull herself up, unable to let go, paralyzed by self-doubt and the weight of expectations she felt crushing down on her. "Get down from there," Davis ordered. "Everyone else continue with the course." Martinez, you're with me. They walked in silence to a quiet area away from the other recruits. Sarah expected another lecture about performance standards and living up to expectations. Instead, Sergeant Davis sat down on a bench and gestured for Sarah to join her. Talk to me, Martinez. What's really going on here? The floodgates opened. Sarah found herself pouring out all her fears and doubts. Her worry that she really was responsible for the accident. Her fear that she would never be good enough. Her certainty that she was letting everyone down just by being there. Sergeant Davis listened without interruption until Sarah finally ran out of words. Then she was quiet for a long moment, staring out across the training area where other platoons were going through their drills. Martinez, do you know why I became a drill instructor? Sarah shook her head. Because I was a lot like you when I went through training. Not physically, I was always strong enough to handle the physical demands. But mentally, I was constantly convinced that I didn't belong, that everyone could see through me and knew I was a fraud. Sarah looked at her in surprise. It was impossible to imagine the confident, commanding Sergeant Davis ever feeling insecure about anything. The thing is, Martinez, that feeling never completely goes away. Even now, 15 years later, I sometimes wake up wondering if today will be the day someone figures out that I don't know what I'm doing. But I learned something important along the way. What's that, Sergeant? The people who are most worried about whether they belong are usually the ones who belong the most. The Marines who never question themselves, who never doubt their own abilities, they're the ones you have to watch out for. They're the ones who make mistakes like Williams made. Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. But what if he's right? What if I really am a distraction, a weak link that makes everyone else less effective? Sergeant Davis turned to face her directly. Martinez, I've read every report from that day. I've interviewed every witness. You know what really happened? You saw a dangerous situation developing and tried to prevent it. When that failed, you immediately provided life-saving medical care to an injured Marine. You followed your training, kept your head under pressure, and probably saved Wong's life. But if you hadn't been there, Wong might have bled out before proper medical help arrived. The accident wasn't caused by you, Martinez. It was caused by one recruit's arrogance and failure to follow basic safety protocols. Don't let Williams' attempts to avoid responsibility make you doubt your own worth. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching other recruits train in the distance. Finally, Sergeant Davis stood up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish this obstacle course. Not because you have to prove anything to Williams or anyone else, but because you've already proven to yourself that you can do it. The Marine who coordinated 3 fire teams under combat conditions doesn't get stopped by a rope climb. As they walked back toward the obstacle course, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. The self-doubt was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. She had faced a crisis, been tested in ways she never expected, and while she had stumbled, she hadn't fallen completely. When they reached the rope climb, Sarah looked up at it with new eyes. It was just a rope. She had climbed it before and she would climb it again, not because she had something to prove to others, but because she knew she could. This time, when she reached for the rope, her movements were sure and steady. Hand over hand, using the technique she had practiced hundreds of times, she pulled herself up. At the top, she paused for just a moment, looking out over the training area where her fellow recruits were continuing their own journeys toward becoming Marines. When she rappelled back down, Sergeant Davis was waiting with the smallest hint of a smile on her face. There's the Marine I've been looking for, she said simply. Don't lose her again. Graduation day arrived with the kind of crisp, clear morning that seemed designed for momentous occasions. Sarah stood in formation with her fellow Marines. She could finally think of them that way, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and nervous anticipation. The past 4 months had transformed her in ways she was still discovering, and now she was about to officially earn the title she had fought so hard to deserve. The ceremony was held on the parade deck, with families gathered in bleacher seating to watch their sons and daughters complete one of the most challenging training programs in the military. Sarah's mother had driven all the way from New Mexico, bringing her younger brother Miguel with her. When Sarah spotted them in the crowd, she had to fight back tears of joy and gratitude. As the platoons marched onto the parade deck in perfect formation, Sarah felt a profound sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. These Marines around her had become more than teammates. They were her brothers and sisters, forged together through shared hardship and mutual support. Even Thompson, who now served as one of the platoon's squad leaders, had become a close friend and ally. The ceremony itself was steeped in tradition and pageantry. The base commander spoke about the proud heritage of the Marine Corps and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. Senior Marines who had served in combat zones around the world shared their experiences and welcomed the new Marines into their ranks. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when Sergeant Davis stepped forward to present the eagle, globe, and anchor emblems that would officially make them Marines. As each recruit's name was called, they stepped forward to receive their emblem and the traditional first salute as a Marine. When her name was called, Sarah marched forward with her head held high, her movements crisp and confident. Sergeant Davis looked her in the eye as she pinned the emblem to Sarah's uniform, and for just a moment, her stern expression softened into something that might have been pride. "Congratulations, Marine Martinez," she said formally, then leaned closer and whispered, "You earned this the hard way. Don't ever forget what you're capable of." Sarah rendered her first salute as a Marine, and Sergeant Davis returned it with military precision. But as Sarah turned to rejoin the formation, she noticed a commotion in the stands. A man in dress blues was making his way down from the bleachers, moving with purpose toward the parade deck. The man was clearly a senior Marine, his uniform decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of years of distinguished service. More notably, he wore the trident pin that identified him as a Navy SEAL, an unusual sight at a Marine graduation ceremony. As he approached the edge of the parade deck, the crowd began to notice him, and conversations started buzzing through the stands. The SEAL stopped at the edge of the formation and stood at attention, waiting for permission to approach. The base commander, clearly surprised by this unexpected development, nodded his approval. The SEAL marched onto the parade deck with military bearing and stopped directly in front of Sarah. The entire ceremony had come to a halt. Hundreds of people were watching as this decorated veteran faced the newest Marine in the Corps. Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. She had never seen this man before in her life. The SEAL's voice carried clearly across the silent parade deck as he spoke. "Marine Martinez, my name is Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. I am here today because of something that happened 4 months ago that you probably don't even remember." Sarah's confusion was evident on her face, but she maintained her military bearing as the Master Chief continued. "My daughter Jessica was seriously injured in a training accident during your recruit training. You were the first person to reach her, and your immediate medical response quite literally saved her life. The doctors at the hospital confirmed that if you hadn't acted as quickly and competently as you did, she would not have survived until professional medical help arrived." The crowd erupted in murmurs of surprise and appreciation. Sarah felt her knees go weak as she realized that Jessica Wong's father was standing in front of her. And not just any father, but a Navy SEAL Master Chief. "When Jessica told me what happened that day, she didn't just talk about your medical skills. She told me about a Marine who had been written off by others, who had struggled and been doubted, but who had proven her worth when it mattered most. She told me about someone who had earned the respect of her fellow Marines not through physical strength, but through heart, intelligence, and unwavering determination to serve others." Master Chief Rodriguez's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the parade deck. "Jessica is fully recovered now and will be graduating with her own platoon next month. She wanted to be here today, but she's currently in her final training phase. She asked me to tell you something, though. She said to tell you that you taught her what it really means to be a Marine, that it's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being there for your fellow Marines when they need you most." The SEAL stepped back and came to attention. Then, in a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives, this decorated Special Operations veteran slowly and deliberately raised his hand in a perfect military salute directed solely at Sarah. The symbolism was profound and unmistakable. Here was one of the most elite warriors in the United States military, a man who had likely served in the most dangerous places on Earth, showing the ultimate sign of respect to a brand new Marine who had once been considered the weakest member of her platoon. Sarah returned the salute with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Around her, she could hear the crowd erupting in applause and cheers. Her fellow Marines were beaming with pride, not just for her, but because one of their own was being honored in such an extraordinary way. As Master Chief Rodriguez lowered his salute, he stepped forward one more time. "Marine Martinez, The warrior ethos isn't measured by how many push-ups you can do or how fast you can run. It's measured by your willingness to put others before yourself, to serve with honor and courage, and to never give up when your fellow Marines are counting on you. You embody everything that the title Marine represents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal pin, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. This is from Jessica's commanding officer, recognizing your actions on the day of the accident. But more than that, it's from every parent who knows that their son or daughter might someday need someone exactly like you watching their back. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. In the stands, she could see her mother and brother on their feet, cheering louder than everyone around them. Her fellow Marines were applauding, and even the normally stoic drill instructors were smiling. The ceremony concluded with the traditional eagle, globe, and anchor ceremony, but everyone knew that the real highlight had been the moment when a Navy SEAL had saluted a Marine who had once been told she didn't belong. Later, as families mingled with the new Marines after the ceremony, Master Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah one final time. "Marine, I want you to know something. In all my years of service, I've served alongside some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. Today, I'm proud to add your name to that list." As Sarah stood surrounded by her family, her fellow Marines, and the respect of everyone present, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She had arrived at Paris Island as a scared teenager who didn't believe in herself. She was leaving as a United States Marine who had proven that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to quit. The doubt and sneers were behind her now. In their place was something far more valuable, the knowledge that she had earned her place among the finest warriors in the world, not in spite of her struggles, but because of how she had overcome them.